Hi everyone, it's Becky here. Welcome to another new video on my YouTube channel. Today is a bright sunny day here in Vancouver and I'm visiting Queen Elizabeth Park. So this is a very big park with several parking lots, and we're trying to find a spot close to the gardens and the view of the city. Here we are at the central part of the park. So the dome building there is a botanical and bird conservatory. There are several little gardens in this park. And this is the lookout of the cityscape below. I'm gonna sit down at the bench and sketch this view in front of me. So in the beginning, I'd like to take a minute or two to visualize the sizes and proportions of everything I want to include on my sketchbook page. So I just began drawing the contour outlines of the mountain ranges in the distance in the northern part of Vancouver, close to Whistler. And now I am drawing the bottom line of the mountains, and then starting to add the little forests or clusters of evergreen trees below the mountains. So here in Vancouver, we have many species of evergreen trees such as pine wood, fir, hemlocks, and yeah, I spot some gigantic ones on the right side with very clear contours of the branches. And quickly adding another row of evergreens here in the middle. These are younger ones. And also a couple of buildings in between the foliage shapes. Now I'm adding this lady wearing a hat on the right hand side of the lookout. It's very nice to include like a couple of people here, not just the landscape. So this park is actually a really popular spot for both locals and tourists. So when I'm drawing the stitching lines on her winter jacket, I'm following the 3D form, the puffy shape of her body as well, which is in between a sphere and a cylinder. I just drew her legs and her shoes. Now I'm adding some more cityscape details, which consists of a really high number of foliage shapes. These are the residential houses on the left side. A lot of them are actually in identical shapes. And yeah, just trying my best to add the forest, the clusters of trees, and then buildings in between. So when sketching a really busy and seemingly overwhelming cityscape like this, for example, the view on top of a mountain of the city below, you do not have to capture every single house or tree that's down there. That's too much work. So what I'm doing right now is to summarize those forest forms and as many houses as I could. And now I see another lady walking her dog. It's a French bulldog. Just drew the chubby face and the little ears, the legs, and the chubby little body. So this lady stayed there for like 2 minutes, enough time for me to finish drawing her and her French bulldog. And she's wearing a pretty loose jacket with a little backpack and jeans. And just adding bits of details for the little dog and the leash. Ooh, it's pretty cute. And now just adding very loosely some more foliage shapes there in the far distance. Now I'm using very gentle hand pressure to draw loosely of the canopy shape of a blooming tree there, right down the wall, and drawing the rocky platform in front of the ladies. And again, trying my best to summarize the positions of these rocks. So I just focus on the largest ones, and then the medium and small ones in between, adding these loose folds on the rocks and a bit of accentuation to separate each piece. Because these rocks are foreground elements and I want to make their definitions clear with accentuations, such as using black ink to fill in those gaps in between, and a little bit hatching to give 3 dimension for each rock. Yeah, and just keep drawing and hatching with the rocks. Now I'm moving on to the foreground trees. It's still pretty early in the spring, and all I see are these bare branches and twigs. And these trees, they're looking larger than those gigantic evergreens in the distance because they're in the foreground. And some younger trees, these are deciduous trees, and also the residential houses in between, keeping the shapes really loose. By being loose, I mean that when you're drawing these trees and houses, you don't have to have complete perfect solid shapes, like perfect squares and rectangles for the houses. You could use a lot of broken lines, and also you could leave some of the shapes incomplete, having gaps in between, just to let these things breathe on paper. And now I'm beginning to add some mountain range details. Our mountains, they have little muscles, so they're not just flat contour outlines. Okay, now it's time to paint watercolors. It's pretty busy at this spot, and I want to finish this as soon as I can. There are a lot of people walking around, peeking behind my shoulders. I am a very shy person, and this is not a super easy time for me with a lot of people are hanging around. Okay, so I just added a bit of diluted lemon yellow with cadmium yellow for the stain of the clouds from the sun. So I see these energetic yellows being reflected onto these large chunks of clouds. Okay, now I just wetted the upper area of the paper with a little bit clear water and putting on this cerulean blue, wrapping around the top contour outline of the clouds very loosely. When painting a sky like this, you really have to know how wet your paper is right now. It shouldn't be too wet nor too dried. If it's too wet, the blue is going to overflow into the nice outline of the clouds. If it's too dry, you're going to have hard edges. So knowing the right time to add the cerulean blue is very important. Now I'm beginning to add the shade color, which is a mix of ultramarine blue and a little bit of royal purple, mostly around the bottom part of these clouds. This is wet into wet as well, so when you're painting clouds like this, know the right time to put on this shade color, so it's actually having a fuzzy effect. Now putting on a bit of cobalt blue or stronger ultramarine blue, depending on what blues you have in your palette. And again, play with trial and error. You may not be able to paint a lovely sky like this right away. It takes a lot of practice. It takes me many years to learn how to paint better skies. Okay, now I'm going to let my clouds to dry before adding more definitions and strengths for the cloud forms. Now I am adding a bit of turquoise for the sea in between the mountains and the cityscape. That's the port of Vancouver there, close by waterfront station. Just wetted the mountain areas with a little clear water and putting on this really illuminated yellow-green containing a really high ratio of yellow. I want to show the highlighted spots of the mountains on a bright sunny day. This is kind of like an underpainting. This is not the original color of the mountains. Yeah, for painting anything, the first layer, I always begin with a really vibrant color. Usually not the original color of that object. Okay, now this is very much close to the original color of the mountains. This is viridian green, mixed in with a little bit of yellow ochre, wet onto wet. The moist, vibrant yellow-green is helping this green to spread out very softly, creating a really organic effect. My brush strokes are also following the directions of the ridges. Okay, so mountains, they are never flat. They consist of so many kinds of ridges, very much like muscles. Okay, and now just playing around with different dark shades of green, like viridian green, viridian green mixed in with a little bit of burnt sienna for even darker shades. And just spreading my brush around to add some gentle shades around the ridges here and there, because it's a really bright sunny day. The shade color, or the deepest greens, doesn't cover that many areas. So again, depending on the weather, if it's a rainy day or an overcast day, we will see many more large areas of deep greens on these mountains. Okay, so moving to the middle part of this sketch, I'm just wetting the overall land with clear water for wet onto wet techniques. So for this area, I want to keep it really loose and not really painting inside those outlines. There's actually no definite outlines for these evergreen trees and houses. Punching on this warm yellow-orange here and there for the houses. They're being illuminated by the sun. And same for most of the trees. They contain a tone of warm yellow. And this warm yellow-orange color is actually a nice underpainting that adds a unity for this middle ground area here. Okay, and put on viridian green for the tips of these trees. Yeah, and my brushstroke is a little choppy, following the foliage texture of these evergreen trees. And just using one brushstroke or two to get each little tree done on the left side. Leaving a little highlight on the right side, just so these trees look more three-dimensional and not just flat triangle shapes. And putting on a little bit of warm orange there. That area is glowing, illuminated by the sunshine, and also on the right hand side on the bottom of the mountains over here. That's the magic of nature. When the sun is shining, not everywhere is full of luminosity. There's always a nice balance of light and shade. Okay, so now I am ready to go back to rendering my clouds. They need more strength. Right now they look too soft. It needs to contain more heavy shades, especially on the bottom. So I just mixed cobalt blue with a little bit royal purple. This is wet on dry. As you can see, there's actually no blending happening, but a lot of strong brush strokes showing the folds of the clouds. These clouds are much more rigorous than those soft floating ones. Yeah, and so that means we have to be brave, adding this deep blue violet tone on top, and also the folding brushstrokes to suggest the heavy puffy shapes of these clouds. So this cloud painting process is the play of water control and also the shapes of brush marks. In terms of water control, I'm trying to make every couple brushstroke to have a different shade of blue with more or less water according to my observations. And on top of the water control of the blue tones, I also need to play around with the different shapes of brush marks. Some brushstrokes may be flat for the shade around the bottom of the cloud. Some might be curving for the middle to the higher part of these clouds. This is a process of risk-taking, and to be honest, there was a sense of uncertainty inside me. I wasn't sure if I would get the cloud look right. There are a lot of shaded areas on these clouds, and the forms are pretty complicated. It is a challenging process, and I'm just pushing on. So when you're grabbing a certain color, you don't have to make it look perfect in the palette. You can just put it on with a dot and then spread it around with a brush to dilute it on paper. As you can see, I did with this triangular area in between the peaks. Now I'm taking advantage of the residue, the leftover bluish gray on my brush tip. Just keep spreading this light bluish gray around the higher part of the cloud for those intrinsic folds. So the shades on the higher part of the clouds are more transparent, and you can still see the warm diluted yellow underneath. Yeah, just adding a few more tiny renderings, and that's it for these clouds. I'm pretty happy with it. Now it's time to move on to paint another layer for the mountain ranges. But before that, I would just want to add a few dashes of orange glow for these spring budding trees. A lot of deciduous trees, when they're budding in the spring, they're showing kind of like an orangey tone. And diluted yellow for this blooming fruit tree, probably, in the foreground. And now, painting another layer for the mountains to suggest the dramatic light and shade condition. Using very thin brushstrokes to suggest the delicate folds, very similar to painting the clouds. So my brushstrokes on these mountain ranges, they are echoing with the brushstrokes of the clouds above, which is really nice to have in our paintings. So still playing with viridian green, mixed in with more or less burnt sienna for the shade area of the mountains and for the tips of these evergreen trees. So once a while, there's a huge group of people gathering at this lookout. And grabbing some orange and a tiny bit of green. Again, I see more orange greens on these foliage shapes. A lot of deciduous trees, when they're budding in the spring, they're not always fresh green. They could have like a yellow, orange green glow. And adding some more orange brown for the rooftops here and there. And I like the way that these houses are kind of similar. It's like a little village down there. And yeah, so adding those bits of browns for the rooftops. Just grabbing a little bit of leftover yellow orange for another layer of definitions for this tree here. It's a very happy and charming little whitish yellow. Okay, and some more muted colors like the leftover greenish grays for the concrete around the city down there. Now I'm just wetting these stone areas with clear water. Putting on some leftover orange brown for both the stone wall and the ground area. Because it's a sunny day, I want this underpainting color for the very bottom layer. So, as I mentioned before, a lot of times I like to do a quick underpainting first before adding the more original colors of those objects. And now I am grabbing a little bit of raw umber, just using little chunks of brushstrokes to suggest the relieved areas of these rocks. So these rocks are actually three-dimensional, very chunky. And mixing viridian green with a little bit of raw umber for these shaded areas of the rocks, so they look even more three-dimensional with this contrasting color. Right on top, wet onto wet, and for the very bottom edge. Okay, now moving on to the very last part of this painting, I'm going to paint the little French bulldog with yellow-orange, diluted a little bit, and some bluish gray that I mix with blue and royal purple, playing with water control. So there's a variety of tones on these ladies' jackets. So pink, and then blue for her jeans, and same for her as well. Using black to paint their hair, a lot of leftover colors. Another layer to suggest shade on her pink winter outfit. And now it's all quiet in front of me. My phone just died around the last 2 minutes of my sketching process. Here is a look of my finished sketch in the bright sunshine. Thank you so much for watching this video, everyone. If you like it, please click like and leave me a comment below. Subscribe to my channel for weekly updates. I try to update my channel with 2 new videos every week, and it's time to go home. There are lots of cherry blossoms along the streets on the way home.